So the NIDA folks, the disease model folks, they focus on the long lastingness of these brain changes. And even they admit often that they're not necessarily permanent, but they can last for some extended period of time. And, a lot of this depends on severity. So for 80-90% of people who become addicted to something, they're going to get off it, whether it takes 4 years or 6 years or 8 years. And for a small percentage, they may not, and it may kill them, depending on what they're addicted to. But our perspective, those of us who go more for a learning model, is we focus on neuroplasticity and the idea that the brain continues to change throughout life. It's supposed to change. It's designed to change. Whenever we learn new habits, new skills, new ways of thinking and doing things, the brain is changing its synaptic structure, its wiring pattern. So that's what I focus on. And as far as evidence for that, you can look at the brain, and there are studies that show that, things change, shall we say, in other ways when people recover. But also the statistics show that, in fact, most addicts do recover. It depends on what you're addicted to. But, for example, for cocaine, the median period to recover is 4 years. For marijuana, it's 6 years. For alcohol, it's 12 years. Cigarettes are one of the hardest things to kick, but there's still a median time frame for recovery, which is 20-something years. And that means that it's not chronic. It changes back, or it changes forward, or development continues as people continue to grow, become more responsible, and take charge of their lives. So the idea of a chronic, pathological state just doesn't really make sense when you look at those statistics.
You touch on this, maybe 80 to 90% of people who do drugs of any kind don't become addicted to them. And even of the people who do become addicted, that habitual pattern is reversible, and statistics show that they will stop eventually. Yeah. There's no line in the sand. But is there a point to which the folks of the disease model have a better point where, the very ends of hardcore addiction, where they say, well, now how is this not a disease?
Right. Yeah. No, you're right. That's pretty much where the argument starts to boil down. That's the part that becomes arguable. And you might want to say that those people who have very severe addictions are behaving in such a fundamentally destructive way. There's different ways to define a disease. If you want to say that people are behaving in a way that's just completely at odds with their society and their culture, their surround, their family, their lives, you could say they have a disorder, and then you could say, well, what's the difference between a disorder and a disease? And then it becomes more of a matter of definition. But for me, the problem is that there really isn't a line in the sand, and even people who are severely addicted to very serious drugs like heroin and methamphetamine and coke very often quit more than half the time, even with heroin. Johann Hari, so about the experiments in several European countries where heroin has is dispensed legally and regulated by medical authorities, and so that people who are addicted can access it without having to call a dealer, without having to engage in criminal behaviors. Right. And guess what? They end up quitting. They slowly, 4% per year, they just get off it voluntarily. So even in rather severe addictions, you see a lot of recovery, given if you give people a chance. That's when you get into the social factors and poverty and the extreme pressures of urban living in certain places where people actually choose to remain addicted because life is so shitty otherwise that it's not an attractive option.
I just